Hello, 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 mystery hunters. This is Anomalous Experiences and your host, Brendan McNamara, embarking on a voyage to the stars and back to Earth, centered in the self and reflected in what it really means to be human and explore these matters of interstellar wonder. And with us today is a guest, upcoming nonfiction author, and an opportunity to evaluate his work before publishing. We really appreciate and are greatly humbled to be joined by one Gary Turner, who has taken it upon himself to investigate the meandering hallways, one would say funhouse of mirrors that is anti-gravity and warp and UFO physics, and bring to us a collection of insights. Now, here we delve into some even more mysterious topics, and that's partially my fault because having steeped in the mystique of the physics behind these things, I've ended up in a place where I want to pursue deeper down the rabbit hole of my own mystery. So we'll have to have Gary back on to explain a little bit more about the individual aspects of each of these scientists, amazing patent holders and scientists, and very unique characters that represent the menagerie that is UFO physics ideas and the various approaches to skinning the warp cat, let's say. And so, thanks for joining us, and if you appreciate this content, please don't forget to like and subscribe and smash them likes for the algorithm, that kind of thing. It really helps. And if you appreciate this and you like it, go ahead and share it with friends. Blast the stigma, blow down the doors, and consider supporting my work at brendosapien.com through Cash App, PayPal, or Patreon. And let's do this together. I hate to even ask for those kinds of things, but it really does help to continue this work. And I want to give a huge shout out to Kurt Jaimungal, who may not know me yet, but his work in this space, he didn't mean to get into this topic. I think he sort of stumbled into it, and it just ends. It's the end of a rabbit hole, but also the beginning of a different kind of rabbit hole. And I think that he's amazing in his methods of theolocution, which he invented that word. I have to give him credit. I think I butchered the word toward the end, but the Socratic method that he embodies in his approach to meandering this advanced physical hallway and complex topics with all these varying personalities that are very quirky in their own ways, oftentimes combative, but how to find coherence and harmony amidst that. I think that is really valuable to any productive conversation, especially where it comes to matters of great importance, significance, and implication. So without further ado, let's get into it with Gary Turner, UFO Science. Thanks again. There you are. Hello, hello. Let you get all.
Hello, hello.
Hi, Gary.
How's it, Brendan?
Let me get on video here. I gotta turn this. I'm so excited to meet you, dude.
We have the herbivarium going on there.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's my background. I also have a front ground you can't see. I breed betas and got axolotls, plants, and all sorts of stuff going on. It's a menagerie. I love life. I'm just fascinated. So that's the other side of it.
I can see all kinds of life running around.
Yeah, you might see some human life come here and there and ask me a couple of questions while we're trying to do this too, because I'm homeschooling. But we'll roll with it. Yeah. Well, maybe we'll just get straight into it, man. Like what got you interested in UFOs, and more specifically, what prompted you to do what some might consider to be a masochistic thing and write a nonfiction book about UFO science?
Certainly. And I'm coming to discover, so I'm originally I'm more of a fiction author.
Mm-hmm.
So I write fantasy novels, and that was my initial attraction into doing literature. And I'm coming to discover that nonfiction science books, just people aren't as eager to pick one up and start digesting.
Yeah.
But
yeah. It's an interesting, the UFO subject, though, is an interesting throughput for a lot of people to get into science, I'm discovering.
Right. So after writing several fantasy novels, I just felt my brain needed a little bit of a palate cleanser, use a different portion of my mind than I was accustomed to using.
Mm-hmm.
So after 2017's Revelations coming out in the New York Times, I had my own personal little, I had to reopen what I thought was a closed case.
Yeah.
And re-examine the new evidence that was presented. And that triggered a lot of different passions of my own when it comes to physics.
What they call the ontological shock factor, or trying to integrate it into what you know scientifically once it's revealed the thing exists, right? The challenge becomes how, or more like
and so much of the information that is thrown at us is either vague or is so highly technical and shot at you in such physics jargon that it tends to either, like maybe 5% and everything else just kind of blows past.
Right.
And I found once I decided I was just going to go ahead and tackle this behemoth, I discovered how much of my own intellect, how much I was missing out on when I would go back and rewatch and pause and replay certain lines in order to make sure I understood the issues being covered.
Yeah, I've had to do a lot of rewatching myself. You're not alone there. It's complex. It's certainly complex. But what I like about your book is how you make a road, right? You build a road first, and you put this squarely in the context of the overall scientific endeavor, as this is just the next step of trying to figure out the nature of this reality, whatever it is we're doing here as a species, and then that it does have some solid backing, no matter if the individual scientists, let's call them Lazar and all these other characters working on this stuff, really fully understand it by themselves each, right? So they all fit into this bigger context of,
and that's an important aspect of the whole thing. Is so many of these science figures are siloed, where they're working individually, partly because of the stigma. And so it's felt like I can't speak openly at what I'm researching. So there's actually not a great deal of collaboration going on. You have Gary Nolan over here. I mean, don't get me wrong. Some of the people like Gary Nolan is totally open to input and is sharing everything they know, which is fantastic. But many of these other figures have been working on their own for decades.
Yeah. And Lazar, even though he came out on Joe Rogan and stuff, he's notoriously enigmatic and reclusive, let's say, for good reason. Yeah. And Pais also leaves some of the sauce out on purpose, he says.
But Dr. Pais is also someone that has, he's been working in the military-industrial complex, and so he doesn't have a lot of peers that are probably open to the subject where he can exchange ideas and get a lot of pushback or other examinations.
Right. Yeah. We're still lacking this kind of open, communalistic, scientific vibe in the subject. I've noticed a lot of people attacking each other sometimes indirectly in podcasts, taking snipe shots at each other, pot shots. I don't like that. But I've been trying to cultivate,
even among the scientists.
Yes, and that's true, and that's I would really love to see more people in college look up the definition of collegiate and what that means. But I digress. I've been trying to open up this this Socratic methodology and getting these characters, some of the not the ones we talk about yet, but there's a lot of interest in the youth, let's say. Millennials and guys like me that grew up wanting to figure out UFOs and getting interested in physics and things like that. Like I'm a biologist by hobby, and why would I get into advanced physics except to try and explain my UFO experiences in a way that makes scientific sense to people?
Right.
Yeah.
And with all of this heady deep quantum mechanics and GR being thrown at viewers, I thought, since Neil deGrasse Tyson isn't stepping up to try and help smooth things over for the general audience.
Yeah, he just tries to dig it in deeper. I don't know, his attitude. He's an astrophysicist, and I respect, but I know there's well, it's disingenuous to say there's no hard evidence. I think I understand the context that Avi Loeb puts it in. Like you need, that before they were saying we don't have the pictures, and then we got the pictures, and then they were saying we don't have the radar confirmations and the data, and then we got the data, and then they say, well, that data is out of context, and you need a scientific context to put that data in, and the right instruments and this and that. So then it gets funneled into this program where that's centralized, and that may or may not be able to be controlled, informationally as to what gets out of there. I've seen this movie before. Right. I just hope we're not repeating what basically we saw before our eyes in the 60s and 70s, the last time this all came about, before they did the sweep.
I do definitely see the disinformation campaign is in full swing.
Yeah.
I just saw last night that NASA basically tried to debunk the Go Fast video.
I saw that. Yeah. It's only 40 miles an hour or something like that. I don't know what to make of that.
There is this, I'm not sure what like a debunking bias, where I think the general populace is more prone to wanting simple answers. And if you can present the slightest bit of one tidbit that says, oh, this is not real, then everyone is happy to accept that and move along.
I've watched that my whole life. Yeah.
Just like when David Grush came out, like a month ago, there was the article from The Intercept, I believe, that was talking about his PTSD issues.
Yeah.
Everyone finds that deplorable that they did that.
Yeah.
However,
where did that even come from? It's like,
however, the debunking bias, that still fulfills a role, even if we feel it's completely wrong. But now, if you ask people about who David Grush is, they're going to say, "Oh, wasn't that guy just dismissed because of PTSD?"
Yeah, the earworm is in there.
Right.
Yeah, you were kind of garbled because we're getting waves of internet connectivity, but I think what you were trying to say is that there's a preconceived bias that once the paradigm is challenged, basically, and then the status quo will release a little tiny piece of data that's anything close to a marginalization or an explanation, and that's what everybody kind of goes with, right? I watched that though, even with the Martian meteorite in the 1990s. If anybody remembers when Clinton came out, and said that we're not alone, and that's never been properly or fully debunked, right? It's not exactly maybe as they said, but those nano traces of that were either remnants of fossilized bacteria or whatever, that's been debunked by one or two, but that not officially, and by no means did it deal with all of the findings. So if people just act like, okay, that's why it's really sad to see, even in the exobiology community, it's not aliens until it's like triple, quadruple confirmed, and by then you might actually be throwing the baby out with the bathwater because
Right.
you were too rigorous, and that's why it's a balance. It's really it's tricky. We're at an awkward stage in our civilization's development of how our cognition evolves. Like science has only gotten us so far, like up until about like the double slit experiment, say, and then we realized that if we're going to increasingly fine tune our vision of reality, we need better tools. And
Right.
I wanted to ask how you brought up the woo in the book, and so I wondered how you're maybe you might want to bring that up in another book, but I wonder how you plan on avoiding that, or if that's something that's going to get dealt with somehow, because it seems to be you can't go very far in the subject matter without coming up to the woo. Stories like
that's actually something that is something I have in mind for future books.
Okay.
My next book, if this takes off and does well, is I'm intending to reach out to, I'd like to study the phenomena from the aspect of a forensic psychologist's point of view. So I'm going to be reaching out to local forensic psychologists and presenting evidence. And then together we can explore different ways to look at the phenomena from a evidential point while trying to avoid anthropomorphizing the issue.
Right. And that's tricky too.
Yeah.
That anthropic principle comes back to bite you again and again.
And then possibly in a third book, I've actually got in my mind A Skeptic's Guide to the Woo-Woo.
And it's not that woo once you look into it. Edgar Mitchell, who was on the Apollo missions, did ESP tests. I'm sure you found in the process, and Zener cards exist. And there's the RNG tests that show greater than statistical norms, and a lot of it. So there's a there. Whether or not we understood it, it was enough to get DoD and the CIA to work on it, right, at some point or another. So my thought for that third book would be to kind of journal my exploration of the subject, where I would apply all these different principles and see how they work, and use volunteers and groups where we could journal and document together. Yeah. That sounds like a really cool plan. I'm really interested to read that book too. Are you sure you don't want to permanently stay as a nonfiction author? No, I'm curious though what you worked on in terms of fiction before this that sort of dovetails with this, and also it seems like a handy outreach to your fiction, maybe to get more, find scientific grounding in the most outlandish concepts. I'm sure that imbues your fiction somehow later on.
So the fiction that I've published thus far is actually completely fantasy. Yeah. It is swords and sorcery style writing. It was something that I loved growing up, and I wanted to cut my teeth and learn to become a good prose author, to transition from doing television over. I actually started out doing television. Then I transitioned into doing graphic novels, where I published a series with Action Labs. And then I transitioned into writing prose. And over the course of the last 5+ years, I've been putting out novels in the fantasy genre. Now, I definitely have a sci-fi dream novel that I want to write that does contend with First Contact.
Cool.
But in order for me to write that novel, I've got to have a retired CIA specialist, John Ramirez, be wrong.
Okay. Oh yeah, no, yeah. The thing is, right, and that reminds me of a line. There is like, yeah, I think we've figured that one out already. About the First Contact bit, whether we've
are we alone?
Are we really alone? Do we really need to answer that anymore? Now about fantasies and swords and stuff and swords and sorcery, it's like part of my brain goes like, yeah, wizard stuff, yeah. Yada yada, advanced nanotechnology, entanglement principles. You go full circle, right? In a lot of conversations I have about von Neumann probes, self-replicating probes, you get to hyper advanced nanotechnology, and then it's like, wait, where does the life begin and the advanced robotics stop? And then you're looking at systems in life like ATP synthase, for example, or these crazy wheels, like some of the smallest structures in nature, the microtubules, what they might, how they might be fine-tuning quantum non-local consciousness into local consciousness, and a lot of interesting stuff there. So I hope you keep going down the rabbit hole. You might you lose your frame of reference pretty quick, but I don't want to talk more than you here. I wonder what we could do, what you think we could do as a community to start having these conversations more openly and get these high-minded scientific individuals to discuss more collegiately and make a working product out of this thing. Or if we can't make a working product out of this thing because we'll get our heads blown off because of the military industrial complex, then how do we normalize it so people know what they're looking at, and then force the DoD to just give us the stuff because we all know about it anyway, or something like that.
Well, I think what we're doing right now is part of doing that. Just having these discussions. The beauty of the internet is we do have an opportunity now to voice ourselves and be heard. Whereas before we were regulated only to what was on our boob tube.
Right.
To use an old vernacular.
I know. I remember that.
And as long as the government or the agencies that work under the government are setting the rules on what we get to know, we're never going to get anywhere. That's why I do applaud people like Avi Loeb and other science figures that are taking the matter into their own hands and not waiting for government funding and gathering their own data.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that what you said too about information structures and governmentally approved information structures, weirdly, I'm not going to go full crypto shill here, but those I don't even want to call them currencies, but they represent supercomputing nation states, if you will, like informational nation states. And just full circle example, that mission to Papua New Guinea by Avi Loeb and so on was funded by Charles Hoskinson, who's a major innovator in that space. That's his coin is Ada, also known as Cardano, which is named after Ada Lovelace. And Cardano is something else, but it's just interesting that as we expand, and I remember reading a book on interstellar travel once upon a time that was saying like, no nation state is going to gear up to get the gears moving to interstellar travel, because that defeats the self-interest principle, game theory. Why would they let a whole colony of citizens go to another star system and possibly be completely removed from contact where they can't be taxed or anything else like that? So it's going to involve this decryption layer. And I mean, that bigger than anything else. People have their theories about why the government's going after that stuff. But financial control, I think it has to do with informational control more than anything else. And a physicist will tell you it comes down to energy and information. That's all that's running the world.
Right. And of course, the whole petroleum industry in being managed by superpowers in the world, there's just not really a benefit to having a path away from petrol fuels.
Right.
So like, if this technology,
survival, maybe
if this technology is as abundant and useful as it could potentially be, it would completely undermine that hegemony for the United States. Yeah.
And it seems so, I mean, if you study it enough, it seems so advanced and out there, but when you really look at it, the way zero point energy actually, I'll just say, might work, is very intuitive. It's extremely simple. It's almost like beautiful. And from what I know, you're just connecting the microcosmic horizon to the macrocosmic horizon. the bend there to the bend there, and you're expanding the threshold at which that hourglass can be widened between these worlds, right? And that's so, to some extent, all our technology so far, from the horse-drawn buggy to the car to just increasing this wideness, that obliqueness of this horizon of energy into propulsion momentum, right? So
the sci-fi fantasy author in me, I look at some of the things that Bob Lazar has said. For example, he talks about element 115 probably being native to other regions of the galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
So, in other words, our little nice, calm, quiet region of the Milky Way is actually a bit more homogeneous.
Mm-hmm.
There's not as many advanced elements in our section of the galaxy. You can imagine an entire society that might have grown up like simultaneous with us, but they did so on a planet where element 115 was native to their environment.
Yeah. Like the unobtainium in Avatar, kind of, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting. So some parts of star-forming regions might have more time to develop heavier elements and actually get to that island of stability.
But could you imagine someone like Sir Isaac Newton being presented this rare earth mineral and discovering its repulsive gravity abilities?
Right.
Would we have gone down the same steam engine path? Would we have gone down through all the different fossil fuel industries?
Yeah.
So there is reason to believe that some of these other societies might be just slightly adjacent to where we are technologically, but they just went down a completely different path. And for them, they see what we've invented with our radical organic fuels, and they're like, whoa, what is this stuff?
What are these guys doing over here? They're still they're in this industrial age, but they're still burning plant parts. I don't really quite get it.
They've probably never seen a rocket before. It's like, why would you do that?
Right. Interesting. Because they talk all the time about, we could have all these different types of extraterrestrials, but what defines extraterrestrial intelligence, and how do we define intelligence on this planet? You could have intelligence emerge on a water world in the form of an octopus or a dolphin-like thing, but if they can't build a rocket or a spaceship or a radio transmitter, and maybe those things don't work underwater, will we ever hear from them, or will we ever see them? Those are two different questions about what the nature of consciousness, intelligence. But then, it gets even deeper. Like, what if, they talk about a Boltzmann brain, which could emerge from just subquantum vacuum and emptiness from random fields. And it could, I think his point of saying that could happen from that was actually more to say, look at all these complex, extremely intricate systems we have in our observable universe. Just take the clouds of Jupiter, for example. And what is that? You look into the core of Jupiter and all these fields rotating and all of these insane energies and complex layers. It's like a battery on steroids. Compare that to the human brain. It's not inconceivable that some of these craft could be kind of projections of other forms of consciousness that just exist in states we can't fathom because we don't have the materials or the ability yet to discern. And maybe AI can help us with that somehow. But that's where my brain goes.
That's where we get into the whole zoological range of who they are.
Who they are, right. Could be.
It's not one they.
And you mentioned plasma, ball lightning, which is another thing. Some physicists go on about, which is they try to put it on ball lightning, but ball lightning itself is very poorly understood, and we don't really have that many examples of it. And it's also really woo.
Ball lightning is so rare.
Right. Even
regular scientists can't verify whether it actually exists or not.
True.
So you see so many examples of these plasma orbs. It's there's no chance they're all ball lightning.
Right. And in my study of places like Skinwalker Ranch and so on, like that seem to exhibit some geo-anomalous characteristics, like some sort of bouncing of space energies off the Winta Basin there, combined with the odd geomagnetic combinations. It's almost like you could have like natural particle accelerators. And what does that do? Like, is it all physical craft? You know, is it Zeta Reticulan grays riding around in physical, ARVs, or is it more like a natural emergence or kind of intelligence that emerges from high energy, insanely piled up energies in our universe? And like, it really is rather odd. But it could be all of the above. Maybe these areas bring more of these things to them. More things crash there, makes more weirdness, makes more crashes. It's kind of like a accelerating freight train.
Yeah, I would be happy to explore the what they call it, high strangeness in that skeptical guide to the woo.
Yeah, it's and the hitchhiker effect is real, as well, measurable. We'll say these are data points, right? And it all falls into the subjective category. But then I feel like if you get enough subjective experiences piled up, that's called an observation. And then we do science on that. These are explorers maps, right? So the whole Neil deGrasse Tyson angle on it, it's like there's not enough real science here to do anything with, right? But that's a disingenuous argument, because there's obviously, in every other case of there being enough observations to pile up to make a theory out of, you got string theory, which might still end up being useful, but as far as material evidence for string theory, much less than like UFOs saying, and ESP and everything else like that. I've known since I was a kid, which my favorite section of the school library was the unknown section, which was like that big compared to the whole library. They're all that big. Your book would probably go there someday.
And that's why I'm happy to release this wide.
Yeah.
I'm registered within the Library of Congress.
Nice.
And yeah, it's going to be available through Barnes and Nobles and all the major book retailers, but I do hope it will end up in some regional libraries for some other kids to wander down and be like, oh, wow, there's actually stuff here
that's worth
exploring.
That's why it's like my favorite thing about the UFO is just the puzzle box factor. Just if for no other reason, just it appearing makes us work to try and figure out what the heck is happening and what's happening with all these experiences. And I'm buying the book for my kids when it does come out paperback. I'm giving it to them for Christmas, whether they like it or not. No, I've got at least one that's really into aliens, but I'm trying to convince him to go down a little bit down the UFO lane, as opposed to just the exobio lane, which is like how they dovetail. And I think
it's best just to have that open mind, be critical, but at the same time, be available to examine the evidence.
Yeah, exactly. And wherever it leads, right? If it leads you to determining it's most likely a hoax, I'm looking at you here, Mexico, alien mummies, and or whatever else comes about, you have to have a critical mind. Otherwise, you're just subjective. Now, that's a far cry from like, I've been looking into some of these serious theories about the non-local nature of consciousness, and that consciousness may be fundamental rather than space-time. But that doesn't lead you anywhere. Like, you could just believe whatever comes in your door, right? That's a whole different matter. There's that world still has some rules we all have to abide by, because we're looking at some kind of like, it's not like the chair is conscious and it's going to tell me stuff. It's more like we're agreeing on some kind of group mental framework that structures what we call reality. If only through
we should, as we explore these more abstract options, we should not stray away from critical thinking.
Exactly.
And venture into the spiritual. I think you got to keep some objectivity.
Yeah. It's a balance for sure. But I think that Einstein, for example, and Newton were both very spiritual people. They were grounded in the mystic. And some see that as a flaw. I see it as that I didn't mean to get you into this. By the way, this isn't like lure Gary into woo-woo land here, but they had that outlet, and I think it helped keep them moving in the scientific world. And so those balance somehow. The dream world.
I do try to approach things. I mean, we all have our own beliefs on what we think it all means. Mm-hmm. But I do try to separate belief from the evidence. And so when I do start trying to journal and document my exploration into like applications like CE5, I'm going to be doing that from an objective perspective while still trying to keep an open mind and explore what's possible.
I'm very excited for the results of that. I've used CE5 for years. And I'm just going to come straight out. I basically every night there's stars here, I'm seeing UFOs. And it's just a common experience for me. That started years ago when I started doing CE5 with friends, and now they're just like, I'll have a thought that I think is especially deep, and there's a manifestation in the sky, and like, wow, that was odd. But I've seen, that's for the 100th time now. So it goes in the back of my mind.
Well, you've got me beat. What region are you in? Are you in like?
Oh, it's in Hawaii too. It's wherever you are. Space and time mean nothing when you go into this.
I've yet to see one of my own.
Okay. That covers one of my questions. Well, I had had experiences, but I didn't count those as like valid until I had them with others. And it was in the context of the CE5 prep work, and then the stuff manifested out of the sky, and then it's like pretty hard to deny. I mean, you could say it's random happenstance, but if it happens this time, and pretty much only when you do this stuff, that's so statistically improbable as to be astronomical, no pun intended, right? So it's a really weird thing, and I also think, be cautious here. I think some of the literature out there and grouping and stuff, groupthink, call it, around that subject is somewhat, it can take you off the mark.
Right.
So you don't have to go so far into that consciousness, universal consciousness stuff as much as like overthinking it. And it's actually just rather simple. When you see it, it's almost like childlike in its innocence, and how it's almost like, and this is going to sound weird, but it reminds me when I feel like it, like Peter Pan stuff, like second start of the right straight until morning, kind of like, where were you guys? Oh, I remember you guys. I mean, you're my guys. Like, you're from this time space that is every.
And why wouldn't it be a deeper philosophical, have a deeper philosophical meaning?
Oh, for sure. It has this, it's just so surprising in the sense that it seems like it's something that would be up here, way heady, right? But it's actually more like here, like through the heart. It gets you right in the heart. And that's unexpected for a lot of people. So you're thinking in terms of your heart mind resonating as one. And that is much more powerful than just the mind. And that's sort of bringing it full circle to our talk about taking these high concepts down to earth. And what you're doing and what I'm trying to do. I wrote you came to me through my paper. I wrote with the idea in mind of bringing this stuff down.
Right.
We're
trying to make it all relatable.
We're Prometheus. Let's not piss off the gods too bad.
Yeah, don't bite the zookeeper.
Well, who's the zookeeper? Are we talking about the government or the reticulans or the higher dimensional hive mind of all creation? I don't know which zookeeper we're talking about.
One aspect, and I explore this in my sci-fi concept novel that I would like to write one day, is the whole, as much as we look out into the universe, we see no evidence of technology outside of ourselves. And so I do wonder, it's like, how is the zookeeper keeping it all secret? How is it that we don't see anything out there?
I would imagine if you're a creative zookeeper, you have some sort of perception filter, so they can't see the bars, some sort of like one-way mirror, and maybe that's what consciousness is to some degree. Maybe it's curated so that it's only self-reflected, but maybe that's supposed to be a two-way window, but we're like blocked somehow. I don't know. These are all interesting questions. And the perception filter is obviously part of phenomenon too, because there's people that see something and the other person doesn't see something, and two different people see two different things, but they all agree that there was a thing seen. And sometimes that's taken to debunk it.
I think Senator Harry Reid visited Skinwalker Ranch, and he had some profound vision when he was on site that nobody else saw.
Right. And that's a weird thing that comes up too. I like to play, like on my website, I had the AI write up this applet that has two blinking lights that you program at fast frequencies. So you can program it up to where just before you can't see the blinks anymore, and then try to look at it and see if you can see blinking. And this is my way to see if you can increase your discernment of, I don't know, space and time or some sort of pattern. And that was one idea I had, is maybe testing the limits and seeing if there might be people are just able to see it to higher frequencies like bees. We know all sorts of creatures that can perceive time differently. And we don't know for sure if every creature in our space-time interprets space-time the same way. It would seem logical that the lesser mass, the faster you perceive it, and then that leads to infinite regress that can get complicated. But the long story short, we're surrounded by alien intelligence on our world, and it's there, and we're still discovering it. I don't know. It was 15 years ago or something like that. Not very long ago, we didn't think of octopi as intelligent or squid as intelligent. That's all changed. That's changed like overnight, right? We now have not just dolphins, chimps, or whatever. We've got this whole cephalopodian intelligent thing that we have to deal
with multiple brains in the octopi.
Yeah, the way the intelligence works is insane. Like the fact that they see through their skin, and they like the very same cells that change the structure of the texture and the chromatophores in there are also perceiving light and texture, and that's why they can have these eyes that don't perceive color, but they can be these advanced chromatographers. It's just nuts, and that reminds me of AI and stuff. Mike Levin, he's a really interesting guy you should look into if you haven't. As you go down this road, a couple to throw out there, like Michael Levin, he's going to win the Nobel Prize soon, I'm sure of it. Lee Cronin, he's working on an assembly theory of life, which is defining life as a self-perpetuating algorithm rather than just a membrane-bound layer. And Carl Friston, who is working on a statistical definition of life through the Markov blanket and Markov chains. So there's just a couple of signposts on the road for you there. I should. Do you have anything else you wanted to plug or chat about, or maybe we could keep this to YouTube algorithm friendly timing for a change?
The one thing I will say that I found fascinating as I put this book together is it does break down into two camps. You have the Bob Lazar chapter, and there's a reason why I put that one up towards the front of the book, beyond just the fascinating aspect of his story. But there's almost a separation from there to the second half of the book, where it's more about our attempts at reverse engineering. And the interesting aspect I found is when you look at all these disparate science figures working on their own, they're all dovetailing into the same space.
Yeah.
So that I find to be a self-evident truth. There's something going on down on the Planck scale, and I think we're nearly there.
Right.
It's just our material sciences and other aspects, those kinks If they haven't been worked out already, which may very well have been in the 1950s and 60s,
E. Townsend Brown and so on.
Nearly there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so too. Very much so. It's there's enough there to be a there. Bob Lazar is very polarizing because there's so much about his story. I used to believe it implicitly. Then I had a few people explain to me what's up with his history. And then you brought me back a little bit in your book, talking about some of the more nuanced explanations for his time in school and so forth, that he was a sit-in free writer and so on. I think I'd heard that somewhere. But I
more than
we get
anything,
lost in the sauce. We get lost in the debate. The fact is, these are all vectoring into this sub quantum new reality phase shift that we're talking about, bending.
Yeah, I would say to watch out for that debunking bias in ourselves.
Yeah.
Try not to just automatically latch on to this person's, I presented this, and this one thing is not true, so therefore you can ignore everything said.
Right.
We should try and prevent ourselves from just completely throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Look at what Riccardo Stiordi was saying about the microwave wavelengths and his Fourier equations. So even if Bob never got a degree from MIT, what do I really care about that, or do I care about the science?
Yeah, and he talks like somebody that could have come out of there in a lot of ways. I did get exposed a little bit more to what he goes on about gravity and stuff, and in more detail and more depth than he ever would in the Joe Rogan podcast. But yeah, it's all pointing to something close to home. And we're playing with this day and night in my Discord channel. Brendo Sapiens Socratic Lounge, if you guys want, invites in the description. But it's just the matter at hand. Like, it's the ultimate subject. It's like, why wouldn't you play with this? It's so close and it's so exciting, and it's a puzzle box for sure.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be so arcane and esoteric, and people don't have to be so mean about this stuff to each other. And yeah, I agree. Like, that griping, nitpicking, debunking consciousness is very limiting. Has its purpose, but needs to be balanced with like theosocratic method that opens up the pathways to communication and heartfully allows people to communicate their ideas to each other in safety. And then we can get somewhere. Once everybody's on the same page, you have to make a correction. You do so like lovingly, like, hey, I noticed you got some great ideas here, and here, and here. I'm curious more. Will you bring up more about this? I want to understand what you mean when you say this thing. And that's the collegiate sort of, you wish more scientists had to take a philosophy 101 class, but I guess that's not required anymore.
And that's why I put together this guidebook, so that it's a short read that kind of touches on all the different bases, so that people can get a quick, here's a handle on where things are at, and let the discussion go from there.
Yeah. Word. Well, that's a really great closing point. Probably. I appreciate your time, Gary. I love this conversation. Appreciate you coming to talk to me. If this is the first YouTube interview you do, I'm glad if when your book gets 1 million copies sold in 6 months' time, this will be the place where people come to see your face first. I think it will. Yeah, bro. Appreciate you. Have a good one.
I appreciate you reaching out. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Bye-bye.
Bye.